It's extremely sad, first of all, just to acknowledge that India is one of the most successful post-colonial democracies. But the what Freedom House has said is essentially an acknowledgement of a backslide which has been happening for some time now. Of course, Freedom House is saying it happened in 2020, but people here would argue that this has been happening for quite some time. And what we saw in 2020 was this phenomena of curbing dissent, of not tolerating even very routine and some would say token forms of opposition. That phenomena reached a kind of apogee, it reached a kind of apex, which was, it got exacerbated due to the pandemic, due to the citizenship protests, and all of that combined into this situation where Freedom House is now saying that India is now partially free or less free. And I think some of the international outcry has also been compounded by what happened with the environmental activist Disha Ravi recently and the criminalization that happened under sedition laws. But it would be wrong, it would be very myopic to look at one or two of these cases or just the free and to say that something wrong is happening. In fact, the Freedom House report, if anything, is pointing out to a much larger and a much more troubling trend that we need to acknowledge. Yes, sir.
Well, exactly. And I think in the long term, when one looks at what Freedom House has actually said and looking at the actions of the Indian government, and we've seen so much happen over a period of time, even before the COVID-19 era, there has been so much that has been taking place in India. And when one looks at this country that is now, as you mentioned, boasted to be the largest democracy in the world at one point in time, and looking at where we are at this point in time, the Modi government, and where is this actually taking the Modi government, but more importantly, on an international stage, Advocate Fawaz Alam, how is the international world going to be starting to look at India, considering what Freedom House has said to say?
See, our claim of being the largest democracy, as well as being one of the most successful post-colonial democracies, that is a large part of India's soft power around the world. And it's very true that the current government is no longer going to be able to boast of its democratic credentials. That's not going to carry water anywhere, because this is something that we've been feeling for some time, but now the world is being forced to acknowledge it. And that's a sad reality. A lot of things have gone south in this current government. That there's no denying the fact. Especially what happened last year, we saw first of all the passage of a very discriminatory citizenship, not just a law, but the plans for the enactment of a citizenship regime that would have led to the exclusion of millions of citizens, particularly Muslim citizens, from citizenship rights. We saw massive protests against the proposed citizenship regime, and now we are seeing that the most prominent leaders of the protest, who were students, who were young activists, have now been picked up and criminalized for the Delhi pogrom, which was actually a pogrom conducted by ruling party supporters against the citizenship protesters. So this is a perfect, actually a very terrifying example of what has been impacting freedom in India. It's not just the government filing cases against a few people. It has been, for the last few years, the enabling of an overall environment in which vigilante action is proliferating unchecked. Vigilante action against people who are considered to be beefeaters, against random public acts of violence that serve to increase fear. So that has been one aspect. Not punishing extreme acts of violence carried out by vigilante groups in public, and then using state machinery to curb the protesters, to curb the civil society and civil rights leaders who are actually speaking out against this kind of violence and hate mongering. So it's been a number of these factors which have come together. And you see, it's as I said, it's not just about cases filed against a few protesters or against dissenters. It's also for minorities, especially for Muslim minorities, as well as for many, for Sikhs today, for many minorities, just the everyday travel in public transport, or looking for a house, or looking for a job, in those sort of everyday experiences, being a minority, expressing your identity, or being associated with your identity, all of that has become much more difficult. So essentially, the enjoyment of freedom on a day-to-day level has been severely impacted these last few years, and that is what we need to focus on much more than a few cases or a few incidents that have happened here and there.
Yes. Now, also, Advocate Fawaz, just looking at Indian society in general and this downgrade by Freedom House, how is this likely to impact on Indian society? Because we know that, India, obviously, a country that was colonized, a country that historically had fought for freedom. And now, when you have this type of downgrade, obviously coming through and looking at India and how Indian society would receive this type of downgrade?
See, there are definitely segments of the society that are where it will lead to some sort of introspection, because there's only a certain limit to which you can say everything is a global conspiracy against this government. At some point, people begin to introspect, begin to ask whether there is something that is going wrong. But that being said, a section of the civil society will do that. That being said, unfortunately, this government has deep pockets of support that have been fed a certain idea that we are saviors of the nation, and the entire world is out to get us, they are against us, and all of this is part of a global conspiracy. So they are ready to ignore all of these things. And we should also remember, see, at a certain point we are saying that this government is responsible, and it is, for a lot of backsliding. But it's possible also because there are some tendencies inherent in our political system which we inherited, remember, from the colonial British administration. And so laws like sedition, which, laws that criminalize free speech, or for that matter anti-terrorism laws today, existed in the British period in another iteration. Laws that curtailed anti-state activity or activity against the crown. So we have a long legacy in our legal system of laws that curtail freedom, and previous governments have been slightly more discerning in deploying them. So dissent has been criminalized before, but this sort of atmosphere where everyday enjoyment of freedom gets curtailed by actions of the state, that has reached new lows, or new highs, wherever you are seeing this from. That is the worrying aspect.
Yes. Now, just looking at it for a person like Narendra Modi, because we know what Freedom House has said, that since Narendra Modi became the Prime Minister of India, we've seen this erosion of freedom in India.
That's true. This should, I mean, I hope this leads the Prime Minister also to some sort of introspection, because he has been claiming India's goodwill, India's soft power, from yoga to Indian culture to Bollywood. He's been claiming to reap benefits of that in diplomacy all around the world. But now it is an undeniable fact. I mean, Freedom House said this. The UN, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, recently spoke out against the situation in Kashmir during the Human Rights Council. There is a growing chorus which is calling on the government to look at what is happening and to do some corrective steps. And now also, I hope, not because of pressure, but because of, I hope that the government takes it as friendly advice of people who are genuinely concerned about a very a good example among democracies going down a bad path. And I hope that this government takes it positively. Whether they do that, whether they actually take it as another conspiracy or another charge against the government, we cannot predict that. But I certainly hope that this leads to some introspection, because there is no doubt that this is hurting the image of India, and this is hurting the image of India due to our own actions. So there is some corrective, some introspection, and some need for course correction required right now. No doubt about it.
Well, Advocate Fawaz Shaheen, I must say it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you this morning on Salam Media, on News and Views. And we thank you. We appreciate your time with us today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you. Walaikum assalam. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Advocate Fawaz Shaheen joining us this morning out of India. India moving from free to tax for India from here. With that, we're going to go for a quick break. We come back and quite an interesting discussion coming up next. And this is with Bafana Modise, South African Friends of Israel spokesperson, coming in defense of Chief Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng.